Hello, you're watching TVP World Talks. I'm Ján Michalčák. Slovakia's populist Prime Minister Robert Fico is expected to take part in Moscow's Victory Day parade in May, an event habitually shunned by Western leaders since Russia's invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Bucking the prevailing trend of avoiding engagement with Putin's regime, Fico threatens to undermine the common EU approach and to legitimize Russia's brutal invasion of its neighbor. Has Fico crossed the line? And is there a risk other populist leaders could follow, breaking up the political consensus even further? Joining us now is Ján Michalčák, former head of Unit for Countering Hybrid Threats at the Czech Defense Ministry. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Good morning, pleasure to be here.
So Robert Fico essentially said, nobody is going to tell me what to do, I make my own decisions, I am a leader of a sovereign country. What repercussions could follow within the European Union? Because European leaders said, well, we're not going to take any such behavior lightly.
Well, it's an interesting question. I'm not really sure that any serious repercussions can come for Fico, unfortunately, and that's also the reason why he chose to ignore the warnings or requests not to go, because he's aware that the options of the EU are quite limited in terms of what to do against him. It needs to be said also that Fico's isolation has been growing in the EU for some time now, basically ever since the election in Slovakia that brought him back to power in 23. He's been accused of undermining democratic standards in Slovakia. He's been undermining the consensus on Ukraine of the EU for a significant amount of time now, although he's voted for sanctions against Russia, unlike Hungary, for example. His rhetoric has been intensive and I would even say belligerent for some time. So, and this follows a trend of him willing to go against the consensus, against the mainstream, so to speak, because I think he believes that that could cement his power grab back home and his popularity with his voters.
What he's saying essentially is that he wants to honor the troops of the Red Army for, his words basically, I'm paraphrasing from memory, liberating his country from the Nazis. Now, we need to look at this narrative very carefully there, because while the Red Army was indeed responsible for driving out the Nazi German troops from many countries in Eastern and Central Europe, it has also brought about essentially a new occupation. Like some countries became part of the Soviet Union, some countries became a part of a Soviet sphere of influence, the Soviet bloc, for decades. So Mr. Fico essentially saying, well, that is essentially fine. He's legitimizing that while being a member of NATO and the European Union. There is an inconsistency there, to say the least.
Exactly. Brilliant point. As you yourself said, yes, the Soviets undoubtedly helped to end the occupation by the Nazis, but immediately brought about a new occupation and a new dictatorship in Czechoslovakia, where Mr. Fico is from. So that's one point. The second point is, it's not really surprising to me, because he's been peddling pro-Russian rhetoric ever since he first came to power, all the way back in 2006. And I think this has to do with his own background, because we have to remember that Mr. Fico comes from a prominent post-communist and communist background himself. He was an aspiring communist lawyer. And I don't have to tell your viewers what being a lawyer in the communist dictatorship really meant, right? It had nothing to do with the rule of law. It was basically serving the interest of an illegal, oppressive party, the Communist Party, and he was aspiring to become a top prosecutor in the communist system. Then in 1989, unfortunately for him, fortunately for the rest of us, the revolution came that ended the communist dictatorship, but he was really aiming for the top echelons of power. So in this background, it's not really surprising that he still carries a deep interest, or I would even say affection, for the Russian regime, because he was brought up in a deeply pro-communist, pro-Russian, or back then pro-Soviet system. So he just follows the footsteps that he himself set to follow in his youth.
And that's a great point, although such pattern is not universal. I mean, in Poland, former communists became social democrats and ushered Poland into NATO and the European Union a couple of decades ago. So obviously it depends on the given country. But let's take a look now at what this could do to European unity. We also have a warning against candidate countries, again, from the EU. Please don't go to this parade. But we have Serbian leader Mr. Vučić going there. Do you think there might be any other leaders of current or prospective members of the EU that might still decide, well, going to visit that parade and take part and see what happens?
It might as well happen because, unfortunately, I am convinced that the international isolation of Vladimir Putin, who, you have to remember, is a war criminal, according to the ICC, and should be brought to justice, but that's probably not going to happen anytime soon. His isolation is unfortunately ending. And given the current geopolitical situation, I cannot even rule out the possibility that Donald Trump from the United States might attend the parade. It's not been confirmed as far as I'm aware, but given the cozy relationship the Trump administration has had with Putin and the really unsuccessful so-called peace talks on Ukraine, where the US alone has been peddling pro-Russian propaganda, which is something unimaginable. You know, were you to ask me 2 years ago if that could ever happen, that the US administration would be following Russian propaganda, I would tell you you're crazy. But unfortunately, this is the new world that we are living in. And given the very real possibility that, one, Donald Trump alone might attend, or even if he doesn't, he's doing everything in his power to end the effective isolation of Russia, that alone could motivate other leaders and also from prospective EU members to attend, because in their perspective, the worldview championed by Putin and Trump has won or is winning, because his isolation is coming to an end and he's again being seen, even by the US administration, as a legitimate partner, which is crazy, but that's the unfortunate reality that we're living in.
What about leaders such as Mr. Vučić, Mr. Fico, Viktor Orban, who for the time being is saying that he's not attending this parade? But they might be looking at Trump as an opportunity to establish new ties, riding the crest of, you know, this sort of wave of new relationships that you've mentioned just a moment ago, that this shifting approach to Russia. But wouldn't they be acting prematurely? I mean, there have been signals that Trump wants to have Russia on his side, but then again, Russia has not exactly been very helpful during the peace process, and so far has been given many incentives, but is not really following up on its promises regarding the ceasefire.
That's also a brilliant point. Could be premature. It could also happen that Donald Trump wakes up tomorrow and totally changes his mind. We've seen it multiple times, be it with the tariff situation, be it with Russia. One day he's angry with Putin, reportedly. One day Putin is a great friend. So we never know what happens. So it might be premature, but the leaders you mentioned, be it Fico, Orban, Vučić, they all came to power thanks to, in their perspective, thanks to peddling pro-Russian views, because significant portions of our populations, unfortunately, basically in every single EU country, has been harboring some sympathies toward Russia. And those leaders, those three at least, have been using the sympathies that some people harbor to be elected, and they want to keep that power, because, for example, in the case of Fico, if he were to lose the power, his own personal wealth and well-being and the wealth of his friends, his inner circle, could be in danger. So they all have a vested interest in not losing power. And unfortunately for all of us, that means peddling more and more conspiracy theories, because I don't even think that Fico or Vučić believe what they're saying all the time, but they know that, and they are good strategists, political strategists, and they know that saying this and appearing to be friendly to Russia will probably keep them to power, because it caters to a significant portion of their populations.
Ján Michalčák was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for sharing your insight and for being here with us today.
It was a pleasure as always. Thank you.
And I'm Ján Michalčák. You're watching TVP World. Stay with us for more latest news, updates and commentary.